Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading property experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, and Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the 2014 and 2015 Property Investment Advisors of the Year.
All right, folks, you're on the Property Couch, where each week Ben and I bring you the insider's guide to property finance and money management.
You've slowed down, mate.
I have.
Summer's slowed you down.
It has. I am fully relaxed.
Ooh.
I could get used to summer.
Mate, we've got some important work to do.
We do have some important work, but mate, we have delivered.
So you need to be up and about, Bryce. Up and about.
I am up and about our guests, I've got to tell you.
Good.
It's a reunion of sorts, Ben.
Yes.
Because we've got Ronnie on the podcast.
We do.
That's
also Veronica Morgan.
Veronica
for those
Morgan.
Of you who don't know her by her
in a previous life,
studio
Ben,
name or whatever you call it.
Wow, it's just the
star name.
Laconic Australian relaxed. It's like Brecky. It's Ronnie.
Ronnie. Does everyone else call her Ronnie?
On production, we did. Yeah.
Well,
I don't think she would respond too much to it, but we digress because she and I shared a previous life on 3 Locations Australia.
Yep.
On Foxtel and 2 Relocations Australia.
Yep.
And it was fun, but it's always good to catch up with her and get some insights into, because she's on the ground as a buyer's agent.
She is.
In Sydney.
Yes.
So it was very, very good that she came on so that we could ask her some queries and questions
We
about
get the backstory of Sydney, post 2018, and we move into 2019 with a few views.
So let's have a chat to Ronnie and see what she thinks. All right, so we've got another special guest here, Ben. Of course, Veronica Morgan is my co-host on Location Australia. And if you went far enough back, Ben, Relocation Australia also. But welcome to the summer series, Veronica.
Oh, I'm sweltering. It's gorgeous weather, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Well, 2019 is going to be a big year, but tell us about what your big observations for 2018 were.
Yes, well, obviously, any listener will know that I'm Sydney-based, and so obviously right on the ground here. It's been, carnage in many respects, but mostly on the front page of the newspaper.
Yeah. So how did you reconcile that? Because clearly, when we talk to a lot of Sydney clients that we have, they were getting weak need, but there's still demand in pockets of Sydney if you're buying well, right?
Well, yes, and look, my mantra has always been quality property, okay? Yep. So if you've got quality, then you can ride out these storms, because the sort of property that you will own will be in a location that is not risky and will always attract interest from buyers. And so when you're in those inner areas, it's all the classic stuff we always talk about, it's the inner 10K radius, good areas, close to lifestyle, transport, all that sort of stuff. The type of property obviously has to have scarcity, and if you own that type of property that owner-occupiers in these areas want and aspire to own, then even in this current market, you can see, or in the market that we've certainly had in 2018, you can see that we'll go to auction and there'll even be up to 8 or 9 people register to bid on those sorts of properties. And so how can that be when you've got a clearance rate under 50%?
Yeah. So it's obviously that leaves us with some clues. But last year, at the end of last year, did you hear any great horror stories? I mean, obviously you're very active in REBA, which is the peak association for buyers agents across Australia. Were there any stories that were coming through the channels about different markets inside Sydney and the greater Sydney basin that caught your ear or caught your eye?
Yeah. Look, the stories I've heard mostly comes from selling agents rather than other buyers agents, to be honest. Yep. And so for instance, I spoke to one agent and he is out in the Penrith area. So we're talking very out of Sydney, edge of Sydney. Yep. And, and I asked him a couple of months back and I said, look, what's happening in that area? And he said, well, around at the peak of the boom, about 60% of the buyers were investors. Yep. And so when the investors evaporated, then of course that leaves a massive hole in your demand.
Yep.
And so when you've got, well, who are you left with? Who of the 40% that are owner-occupiers, who are they? What sort of people are they? Well, they're first-time buyers. So therefore, they're pretty much capped out at 650,000. And so that therein lies a problem. If you've got a property that you think is worth more than that, well, who's going to buy it?
Yeah.
And so you've had people caught out, people that thought that they couldn't lose by buying some older houses and renovating them and trying to flip them, for instance. You have people caught out in that because they have then value-added something to take it over the $650,000 threshold, and you're suddenly in a market where there's no buyers. So that's just one scenario of how people can get caught out in the Sydney market when they've been buying in an area that is so dominated by investors, pushing up prices.
And Penrith is a community hub, right? And it's actually got some medium and high density stuff rolling through there as well. So, I was hearing stories of people who were paying off the plan, in the sixes for 2-bedroom, 5s and 6s for 2-bedroom apartments. And I'm sort of saying, whoa, really? I mean, that's some scary stuff, right, in terms of, and if it's all demand-led by investors, while we always talk about owner-occupier appeal, and at the end of the day, the market will find its equilibrium, its balance, where an owner-occupier is prepared to pay because they control 70% of the marketplace.
And that's exactly it. And it's not just prepared to pay, but can pay, as we all know. You've got to have people there with the incomes that can actually support buying a property to live in. And, I was hearing stories also in the Shire, for instance. You're talking about buying off the plan. And a first home buyer couple that paid, I've got to try to remember exactly what these figures are, but something like $840,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment in Miranda, I think it was. So, correct me. I could be wrong slightly because this is not my story. This is anecdotal. But, so they bought 2 years ago off the plan. It comes up to settlement and it's basically wiped 20-25% off the price they paid. So the valuation has come in about 20% less. And that's not uncommon in some of the outer areas that we're seeing also in the northern suburbs. We've heard anecdotal stories of people buying out Kellyville Way and those types of things, and have certainly realised a paper loss if they can settle it all, right? Well, that's exactly it. If you're a first home buyer and you have your 20% deposit and then that's just been evaporated effectively. Maybe your parents can help you out. Maybe, who knows what else you've got to throw into that. But you've got some pretty hard decisions to make. And so it's certainly in the outer areas where supply is not a problem, i.e. there's plenty of it. And where there have been artificial inflation caused by investors. That is the Sydney story, and when you look at macro figures, of course, that's all you're hearing about because that's dominating the headlines. Those sorts of stories.
Veronica, throw in the idea that in 2016, when you were buying off the plan, when everyone else was getting on the bandwagon, you went and saw your broker and they said, you could borrow about $700,000, $800,000. And now you're going back to that same broker and they're saying, the world's changed a little bit. We're really sorry, but you now can't borrow that amount anymore and you can't execute on the contract because they can't get finance.
It's just horrific. And you think about it, we're all so gung-ho about finance. We're all so easy to get. And, this is in reality, I think that it's a good thing long-term for us to be a lot more careful around what we borrow to buy and how much we borrow and all that sort of thing. But we all lulled into this false sense of security around, how easy it was to get financed. And so people were borrowing easily to buy crap.
Yeah, makes sense.
Hey, Ronnie, when you were, because you're on the field buying, I know that you live in the inner west and but you buy all around Sydney. What was your observations of auctions during the peak of FOMO, and then what you saw at the end of 2018? How would you describe the difference between the two auctions only 12, 15 months apart?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting. So the peak of FOMO, what I always see that the critical, or buyers just lose the ability to be critical about anything, you know. So there's this classic street in Balmain called Mullen Street, and, you know, I've sold on it when I was a selling agent, but I've never bought on it, and I will never buy on it. And it's a classic street, so you ever say it to any of the locals around here, so like you buy on Mullen Street when it's a hot market, when you're desperate to buy and you're worried you're going to miss out. But when the market slows down, when it goes back to being a buyer's market, you wouldn't touch Mullen Street with a barge pole. And that's the sort of classic. So in FOMO, people are fighting over garbage. And now, it's, you know, the little tiny whiff of garbage and everyone runs a mile. Buyers become particularly picky when things slow down. Yeah. And that's the thing that they forget to do when FOMO is going rampant. You know, they're all thinking, I've got to get on the market. It doesn't matter what I buy. I just got to get on the market. They're forgetting that that very same property will you know, turn buyers off in droves when buyers have choice and when they can afford to be picky.
So can you just paint a picture of that street for me? Are we talking that that's a sort of more derelict area, or is it more the upmarket affluent street, best street in Balmain? What's the...
Oh no, sorry, it's the busy road. So it's the main arterial road in and out. It's a skinny but busy with buses and noisy, and it's just not a very nice street to be on.
That just helps our interstate listeners understand.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's good. No, that's good, but you certainly clarified that easily.
Yeah, so what we saw is that pickiness. So in a booming market, and you would see people take a ticket, half the time at auction it was like we'd see 20, 25, you know, I didn't crack 30 people registering at auction, but in New South Wales you have to register to bid at auction. So you can go there half an hour prior to the auction, watch people lining up to register to bid, queuing.
Yeah.
And just insane. I never actually counted.
It'd be nice to know who your competition is down here in Melbourne.
But now it's like you shoot a gun through. You know, it's you shoot a cannon through the registration table. There's nothing there, and so and that's a big difference. So that, you know, you're just not getting that competition, and in many cases not even getting one person register. So that's obviously a massive difference.
So what do you see of the opportunities in 2019 in Sydney? What should they buy? What sort of suburbs? Clearly, you know, blue chip suburbs are still going to be great. But what are you keeping an eye out for, and what do you think that people should keep an eye out for in a market that'll probably still be riding some negative headlines for a little while?
Yeah, what I see is one of the things that when it's a hot market, you actually have, or buyers have greater access to information than they do in a slower market. And what I mean about that is that when a vendor or an agent's happy about the sale price, they will post it online. So when you get into, you know, realestate.com.au or domain.com.au and you're doing your research into what's sold recently, you know, you'd see the price. Whereas market slows down, vendors aren't as happy with the prices they got, agents aren't as proud of the prices they got, and so you'll see more of this PND, or price not disclosed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so for the buyer's ability to then really know with any level of certainty what all the recent sales prices have been for the comparable properties in that area, it's a lot harder now than it was.
Yeah.
So what we see is that different agents have very, very different levels of competency in terms of how they can manage A, their owner, and B, the buyers. Now, if you've got a very fearful, this comes back to your mindset minute, Bryce.
Yeah.
If you've got a very fearful agent, and there are a lot of them out there because they haven't necessarily been around long enough to get that this is, it's a cycle and it's tough, but all things end. You know, these things do come to an end. And if they have never been through this before, they won't know that, and they don't know how to handle it. And if they've got an owner that's been reading a lot of headlines and is particularly fearful, they're feeding off each other.
Yep.
And that fear then infects the buyers.
Yep.
And so you can get a situation where you've got properties, individual properties that are quite good,
mm-hmm.
and they severely undersell. And then that price is not published to the public. And so another buyer might come along dealing with a much more accomplished and experienced agent, much more competent agent, who is handling and managing their owner in a lot more professional way with a lot more guidance, and actually will be more authoritative with buyers as well. And you'll get a better result for maybe even an inferior house.
Mm.
And the buyer that pays that price doesn't necessarily know that one few doors up, which was actually a better house, actually sold for maybe a little bit less or only a little bit more. And so there's that relativity and that understanding of that relativity that's not out there at the moment.
Yeah.
So for a buyer to really navigate that, they need to sort of set their own course and really understand, how to recognise what's a good quality asset, what a good quality property, price it themselves, make their own mind up on what that property is worth, and then really look at that agent and the way that agent is operating and to see, are they confidently and competently handling this whole thing, or are they freaked out and they've got no idea what they're doing? Because if they're at the latter, there are opportunities in that. If they've got a good listing and they are not able to manage it properly and not able to manage the market, that's where we're seeing opportunity.
And it's interesting you say that, Veronica. Back in last year, in late November, I was contacted by a client they're looking to relocate back to the UK, and they've got a couple of properties. And one of the properties they thought they would sell, right, because they wanted to reset their money and buy back in the UK after starting a family. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. So what sort of research had they done? Well, they've spoken to a couple of agents. And the tactic of one of the agents was this. He goes, if you want to get that money, I'm going to do this as a silent auction, right? So I'm not going to go to auction. I'm just going to do this as an off-market buy in the advent that I'm going to get maybe a buyer's agent or an investor who doesn't know their numbers, who can't obviously see what's been selling recently, won't get that fear campaign going and see if I can just get one mug to pay me the price of what they want. So I'm thinking that's a really interesting tactic. It also works for them, for the selling agent as well in a way, because it's embarrassing when they take something to auction and there's no bidders. So they're sort of, one, they're saving face. Two, it's a quick little sale behind closed doors. And three, they're sort of thinking, I only need one silly person to not pay the right price for it, right? Now, I'm sort of thinking, no, I mean, for this particular couple, I've told them not to sell and they don't need to. We've crunched the numbers. But that's the sort of mindset shift and language shift that's going on out there with some of the selling agents as well.
Yeah, and that sounds like a very, accomplished sort of sales agent that would come up with that type of approach.
Yeah.
And we are seeing a bit of that as well. And there's a absolute mixed bag out there. And I think this is part of the problem, is that there's such a lack of consistency in approach, in results, in all of that. So buyers are finding it incredibly difficult to read what's going on.
Yeah.
And that makes it worse, because of course that level of uncertainty doesn't breed confidence with anybody. But that's a very interesting approach, I have to say.
Yeah, and so therefore, Veronica, would you say then that this is a little self-serving, so try and be as neutral as you can, but would the buyers find it difficult not using a buyer's agent, or do you think that can be navigated for someone in this market?
I actually think that, and I'm not saying this purely to be self-serving, but I know it may sound that way, but I actually think that a buyer's agent adds more value in a buyer's market than probably even in a seller's market. Yeah. Because, in a seller's market, when I'm meeting a potential client, I can't hand on heart say, look, I'm going to save you on the price you pay. I can give you great guidance. You can make sure you don't overpay, all these sorts of things. But in terms of actually negotiating, it's the value is over time. There's a lot of different types of value proposition, but certainly in this market, I can hand on heart pretty much guarantee I'm going to save you a bucket load more than actual fee. Yeah. Straight up, because buyers still do get a bit emotional, and they also don't know how to read all this stuff. It's really it's much more complex than I think probably even I've encountered in the past. Yep. And because I spend so much time thinking about it and really being very observational, I guess, in terms of behavioural aspects of all the players, then I think that does bring a massive advantage. And I'm finding it fascinating. I am, because all these agents, I was talking to an agent only the other day as well about the end of last year, and he was saying, I was telling all the potential vendors they should be selling then, in November, rather than waiting until January, February. Now, traditional wisdom has always been you wait till January, February, because then there's a shortage of stock. But when you've got an agent that is so focused himself and not able to pull out and look at helicopter, he's just, I've got to get a listing. This is what I've got to do and say in order to get that listing. Okay. And and then he's got that fear, and then he's engendering that into the actual owner, and this is all self-fulfilling, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think what comes out loud and clear for me, I know I've sort of segued way off what I was answering there, but what comes out loud and clear for me is that people are making decisions around property, whether they buy, whether they sell, whether they hold, whether they renovate, and whatever, and they're really thinking in little silos, and they're often thinking in little bite-sized blips of time. They're not thinking big picture. Why did I buy this property in the first place? As opposed to, I need to sell now because the market's falling and I've got to get out.
Yep.
And that's the sort of conversations these agents are having with owners. I've got to get out. Well, hang on a minute. Why did you buy this place?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And that's
Do
the
you really
message
need to get out, you know?
That's the message that we're trying to encourage our community to take on board, is that sure, there might be a bit of turbulence for the next couple of years, but unless you're planning to retire in the next couple of years, you still probably got 10, 15 years still left in your plan. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Let me just add in another little anecdote too. So in Balmain, we bought a property in November, and that same property had sold back in 2016, so only 2 years earlier.
Yep.
And it was a little cute little terrace, and the couple that bought it had subsequently, I think they may have had a baby when they first bought it, and obviously had 2 children, and it was too small. So they bought the wrong asset back in 2016. They outgrew it far too quickly. They obviously weren't thinking, didn't have advice, whatever. But, everyone's saying the prices have fallen, that the prices are now pre-2016 prices, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's not true. We bought that property. We paid, it wasn't a huge amount of gain. It was roughly about a 5% gain in that two-year period. Still a 5% gain in a hell of a market. And there were other buyers on it around the same sort of figure.
Yep.
So we weren't the only buyer at that price. So there is, maybe if that person had bought in 2017, they would have paid over, what we bought, but we're talking 2-year period in Balmain, and that just shows that in a solid area, as long as someone didn't pay too much in the first place, that there's still some growth in it.
It's a classic case, isn't it, that when you there's people who want to be in the Balmain postcode, there's people who want to be in the Randwick postcode, there's people who want to be in the Double Bay postcode, and that price point compared to obviously what the median might have been, I'm anticipating it was below median in terms of what the overall area is, that there's still demand to get into those postcodes, and sort of leads me into the conversation around, even though at the end of last year, activity was down and registrations were down. Can you tell me, with the really nice, well-presented owner-occupier appeal properties, were you still getting multiple registrations for those? Were they, those really classic homes that are just beautiful and people can see themselves in them? Were they still...
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that doesn't change. In the years that I've been doing this myself, those cracking properties, when they come up, doesn't matter if it's a buyer or a seller's market, those ones just always get the turn up. And they always
do.
get, yeah.
They do. And interestingly enough as well, when FOMO was going crazy, we price out properties before we go to auction. Obviously, we have a very rigorous pricing research process, and also a very rigorous framework that we take our clients through so that they can actually set their maximum well and truly before we get to that auction or negotiation, okay? So when the market was going gangbusters, our goal was to buy within that range, and usually the only way we could do that is to try and buy it prior, because any property that we weren't able to buy prior to auction, we'd go to auction and they'd all go well over the range that we could recommend. So that was pretty much the litmus test. And so we were like, that's it, we can get in our range, buying prior, if not, go to auction, and we're probably not going to buy it. Now, what we see is the difference being, we'll price those properties, and those sorts of properties, even though they've got lots of people at them, they will sell at the top end of that range. They don't go over that. And that's the real difference. So that the FOMO is what took even good properties and even some pretty ordinary ones well over what was reasonable. Now we see properties that are that A grade, where they're getting the interest. They'll sell for the upper end of what is reasonable, and anything else is discounted off that, if you like. So that's sort of the way it plays out, we see.
Yeah, makes sense. So do you see any of your clients lifting their eyes in terms of the borders and sort of thinking Queensland or Melbourne or, even Perth? Are you seeing any evidence of that?
Not Perth. Poor old Perth. Look,
Probably,
I've had some
probably
very
at the bottom.
conversations. Yeah, I know. But then, I'm not a fan of trying to pick cycles. I like to pick good quality assets. And I have been having some conversations with some clients, and it's around about their time frame. So if they're looking outside of Sydney, we really have to talk about, well, I'm a fan of Sydney and Melbourne, right? Because I like blue chip. That's my thing. And in fact, my next purchase will probably be Melbourne, my personal. And that is because they are the two strongest markets in this country. I mean, all your listeners have heard all this before. Outside of that, if you're going to look at, say, Brisbane and Adelaide, and I know you guys are borderless and we're not, but I still have to have conversations with my clients around that because I'm about giving good advice, and it's not just about buying.
Yeah.
And so if they are wanting to have, they want to look in markets that might have better growth predicted, say, for the next 5 years than Sydney or Melbourne, then, we are having conversations about Brisbane and Adelaide. But certainly Adelaide, in terms of the distance from the CBD, is a hell of a lot tighter than it is in Sydney or Melbourne. And Brisbane, the story is around house, not apartment. Do not touch an apartment with barge pole, and around a house and what you're wanting to achieve with that investment, et cetera, and timing and all those sorts of things. So, yes, we are having conversations, and some are going and getting advice from local buyers agents in those areas, and some of them are actually deciding that maybe property is not actually what they want to invest in at the moment. Yeah,
sure. Okay. Now, the final one for me is, obviously there's been a lot of talk about the proposed changes to negative gearing. What does that look like from your filter? How are you surveying the landscape with the Labor government looking likely to come into office in the next election?
Yeah, this is very interesting, and I've been doing a lot of thought, a lot of questioning various experts on this one. We actually interviewed Noel Whittaker. He had a really interesting take on the negative gearing thing, aspect of saying that, so Labor basically had this ill-advised policy, and I know we're all on the same table about that. And he was just basically putting out the numbers and saying, okay, well, say somebody buys a property at a negative gear, say until the point at which it becomes cash flow neutral, they might be claw back, 25 grand's worth of tax that they would otherwise have paid, and then they actually start paying tax actually on the income that it generates, and then they become self-funded retirees, and they're paying tax on that income, well into their 80s, 90s, or whatever, plus they haven't actually drawn down on a pension. And what does that save the government? I think the economists have worked out that's, for every self-funded retiree, it saves the government something like $800,000 or something. That to go down this populist path, to say supposedly the taxpayer 25 grand, but the real cost could be, $775,000. And that was just an interesting way to look at this whole negative gearing argument. But
it's a real way to look at it, right? But that's not the politics of it. That's the problem.
Exactly right. So in terms of what is it going to do to prices, well, that's an interesting question. I suspect that what we are going to see is this last ditch bolt, before the gate closes, and everyone who wanted to invest will suddenly think, oh my God, I want to get in there, and I want to make sure that I can actually claim negative gearing on whatever I decide to buy. And so you'll probably see this little spike in prices. And
it'll be called the election bump.
The election bump, exactly. And over the years, I've seen this happen with GST. I've seen it happen with, various grants for first home buyers, et cetera, et cetera. So that will happen because people are sheep. And the very same people that will make a decision to buy an investment property based on its negative gearing possibilities, well, that's an insane reason to buy a property, full stop.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, it will catch all of those short-term thinkers who aren't really focusing on the big prize, and they will all do what they do, and we just have to try to, if we want to buy a property that we want to get some negative gearing on and we want to get it before that things change, then we're going to have to do it now rather than wait.
Take advantage of the grandfathering rules.
Yeah, so I mean,
exactly.
It's pretty clear to us from speaking to all the experts that we're talking to that negative gearing is going to be the absolutely biggest story of the first half of 2019. Is there anything else that's sort of catching your eye, Veronica, that might be a theme for 2019 and you want to call it early as the start of this new year?
Oh, God, I wish I had my crystal ball just handy. Look, I don't know. You know, I just think that in a way we're in a bit of a... look, I've got a bit of a theory, okay? So when APRA started with all their restrictions, and it obviously hit investors first, and then it took a while, quite a delayed reaction in terms of owner-occupiers, and I think that's when it's really bitten, because that's impacted people's ability to get on with their lives, you know, and this really started taking shape at the end of 2017, and in fact I wrote a blog on it called the embarrassed buyer syndrome, and what it was is that home buyers suddenly started realising that they couldn't get access to money in the way they always got it, right? Now, so move into the beginning of 2018 and, you know, we'd gone from having clients that came along saying, yes, we're pre-approved, and then bang, whatever we found, we checked in with the broker, it was for good, we bought, to clients coming along saying they're pre-approved, we found a property, go back to the broker to make sure that everything's on track. Oh, hang on a minute, there's some more documentation required by the bank, et cetera, pushed out to a month. And that was at the end of 2017, rolling to the beginning of 2018, those same type of buyer finding more and more restrictions, more and more, justification needing to be provided to the banks, more and more, oh dear, I've got this underperforming asset, some investment property I bought somewhere that hasn't been performing, there's now a drain on my borrowing power, et cetera, have to sell that. All these things have been put in place that really just stretched out this whole pipeline of being, you know, from the point at which they decide they want to buy a home or upgrade their home to the point at which they're able to. And so that's pushed out to sort of 9 months, maybe even longer with some people. Now, ultimately, that's created a massive amount of slack in the system, because all of those people have to come to grips with the new reality. Now, I actually think in 2019, maybe we'll start to see some signs of everyone's come to terms with it, and we might get into the new norm, i.e., people don't suddenly decide they're going to buy and then realise they've got 9 months worth of work to do. You know, they might actually start doing that 9 months worth of work and then they decide they're going to buy, if you get my drift. I think the different mind shift.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. I mean, there's no doubt that you need to have your spending story for 3 to 6 months absolutely squeaky clean. Otherwise, the lender's going to scrutinise you about it. So I think access to credit and what you're just talking about there is people's conditioning around credit has to change, and that's probably going to be the new story of 2019 as well.
And a paradigm shift of 6 months, because if you're thinking, I'm going to buy a property in this, you know, irrespective of the election bump, right? But if I was going to buy myself a property in the middle of the year, well, now's actually the time at the beginning of the year to start preparing for that, rather than thinking I'm going to buy it, sort of start preparing 5 minutes before I actually want to make the decision. Yeah.
So I think what I'm seeing and what I'm, I guess, anticipating is that as that message gets out there, as people actually start re-evaluating their whole approach, then I think things will start smoothing out again, because then that will be the new norm. Yeah. So that's my pick. Whether I'm right or wrong, well, I guess interview me again in another year and we'll find out.
Well, that's a very good point you make, but we certainly will have you on the podcast later on in the year. But we certainly appreciate you taking some time out of your summer to share your insights with our audience. So thanks for coming on.
Lovely to chat, boys.
All right. And if you want to check out Veronica, you can check out her podcast called The Elephant in the Room, which is really terrific. And I'm sure there's plenty of reruns on Foxtel of us many moons ago.
Running around buying properties.
if you're kicking back in the air conditioning over summer. But thanks again for coming on, and we'll speak to you later in the year.
Pleasure.
All right, Ben. So again, it's always good to get someone who's at the coalface to understand what's going on, to hear the stories about the auction. It's interesting about the FOMO, the different streets that make sense in FOMO, that don't make sense when there's no FOMO. So I like Ronnie. I think she's street smart. I think she's a good buyer's agent, but I think she's really, really street smart.
Some really good tips around the fact that, you know, getting advice and getting help in this type of market, you know, the power is in the buyer's hand, but if you're not a good negotiator, you may get taken advantage of, right? You may pay too much, whereas a great buyer's agent who's active in the field, you know, so Veronica is quality
Quality.
when it comes to being in the field.
No, it's good to have her on board.
So you're talking about your TV stuff, and I've got some breaking news, Bryce.
Yeah, well.
Tonight, got a little new show coming on.
Little new show coming on, yes.
Well, yeah, Escape from the City.
Yep, that's true.
So, so it's on tonight. Do you know if you're the first cab off the rank, or who knows what's going on there? You'll have to tune in.
You'll have to tune in and check it out.
That's showbiz. You'll have to. The Jeopardy's right there.
It's taken me 220 episodes, Ben, but you're on board now. Wonderful. Yeah, no, so thank you, Ben. It was a wonderful project to be a part of, so I'm looking forward to seeing if the audience has got an appetite for it. So if the couches want to check it out.
World premiere tonight on ABC. Check it out.
So thanks, Ronnie. Thanks for coming on to the Property Couch, Ben, but we still have lots more to deliver.
We do.
So much more. So stick around, folks. Twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, you get part of the summer series. And Ben, before we get to the next guest, what have we got?
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Too true. See you on the next episode, folks. Want more great content from the Property Couch? If you haven't had a chance to go back to the foundational episodes, we got good news for you. Go to thepropertycouch.com.au/TPC20 and check out the free binge guide, which gives you the insights you need from the first 20 episodes, where we unpack the foundational pillars of the Insider's Guide to Property, Finance and Money Management. It's completely free and available now.